Thank you. Are you busy there?
Oh, no.
I wanted to say hi because we haven't even.
I know.
Emailing.
Oh. Thanks. Okay. Well, you guys. Start with the introductions. Is the Zoom people? How is this sound? Is it okay? Can you still hear me? Is it too loud? Is it echo? Anybody on Zoom? Anybody on Zoom?
No.
Sadness. Okay. Hopefully it holds up. So aqui hoje que ordem deste caso está continuando a I want to say too much for the planning committee to come out and invite me out here. So if anybody caught my talk last year on this subject, I'm turning this down here.
Yeah, people know where that. I think it's just the speaker volume.
Okay.
Hey.
So I did this discussion, everyone laughed. This is going to be like building on that one. And then I'm going to recap that one a bit and try to get through it. A lot of it is like intro to archaeology. I'm going to go through some Indigenous engagement stuff, kind of how we got there. But then the fun part for me is a lot of that Indigenous perspectives in archaeology. So I also want to say chief lecture for the drum group. Normally we have our men's drumming group on Tuesday night. So they all decided to come hear me. So they don't get enough of me. And what I like to do a lot of singing because that's some of the points and methods I use to teach that other side of something that's not just an artifact and not just those objects we're putting up there, ancestral materials and remains that we're dealing with. And so one of the things that I go into is songs or regalia or all those different aspects. So I use a lot of song. And I have the entire men's group here tonight, or most of the men's group here. So they're going to help me kind of throughout the presentation. We'll do a couple of songs throughout. You guys can já na New já no Norway. You know I'm no Joao. You with the much coming on the Nokumik, that's coming on even, that's coming on the Wadi. Nós estamos a Google, e o Watan, e no da mais So the first part, so vindication, notice, get your money to, and that we like to give Jack back in the movie after that, the wind and the wall, I know as well. So I know a little bit of language and I try to use it as much as I can. So that first part, every time we speak, every time we get together, or we want to talk, we want to have a council, we want to share something or commune together, we invite those ancestors and those grandfathers, those grandmothers, in that great spirit to come with us. And then that will come in with a good heart, good spirit, and a good mind. And the second part of that was kind of a thought, like this was like out of a book that we were taking during language class that Jamieson translated. And I really like that script because it was just talking, it was like the season, and it said, it is fall, it's spring, and it's going to be summer, and then it's going to be fall, and then it's going to be winter, and then it's going to be spring again. And then that cycle continues and repeats. And I was like, oh, I really like that. That speaks a lot to me because that's how I think about things, and that's how a lot of that philosophy, that Indigenous philosophy, I'm going to talk. And then so the song that we did to start off was a song that we made around archaeology. And it was so that formation of the song is in one of my slides. I start talking about artifacts, repatriation and matriation. And one of the things that we kind of think about a lot is this idea of archaeology and when we're on a site and we want to be a part of it, we're a part of something that's not natural to a lot of our police, digging things up and moving them and reburying them somewhere else. So I was at a loss for how to deal with that, and emotionally, spiritually, and even physically. So I reached out to some language speakers out of Curve Lake, Mary Taylor. And so she gave us that word for our repatriation and reintegration. And it was the word you like now when the one get out that you gave you asking the government. And it's those that take care of those that look after our ancestors and then set them along us. And then so after we got gifted that phrase, it helped me kind of form that song, and that's the song that we sang to start off. Because a lot of the work that we have to do is going to be relying on a lot of allies. A lot of communities don't have the support or the financial capacity to handle a lot of this, or the knowledge capacity to handle this. And that's where we're going to have to rely on people outside the community to work with us. So that's one meaning. So I think we're good to time it. Good to go? Okay, we're going to start. And I am going to start off with a video. I usually leave this to the end, but sometimes I don't get to it. I really like to show it.
Culture unit coordinator. And she's the best. So what are we doing here today? What was the question? She's Mark's right-hand man. That's great. Right-hand.
We're starting it over. Sorry, guys.
And culture unit coordinator and my boss. And she's the best. So what are we doing here today? What was the question? She's Mark's right-hand man. That's great. Right-hand woman. So what are you actually making here? I say what's up to the spirit that is great. And what is rice? Right? Oh wow! Can you actually do a little demonstration for us? Did you get this? Okay, we'll just cut to that.
I am making bannock.
Little bannock bites.
You heard it here. Little band bites. And what goes into making the bannock bites?
That would be flour, baking soda, and water. And lots of love.
Gotta have that love. Gotta have. Oh, right. So, what is the process?
Filling in.
Bannock.
Dry bread.
Sorry.
Bannock. It's all made the same. So how I make it is I do 1 cup of flour with 1 teaspoon of baking powder, and then I just add water as I go. I usually do it in like 6-cup batches, and we roll it out, and I use a little the size we make them, so they're like bite size, and then we have cinnamon sugar for it. Oh, sorry, first we fry it in oil, and then we put it on a pan. There's cinnamon sugar available, and they have homemade jam available for it. They eat it so fast, I don't have time to stop.
Thank you so much, Leslie. So Sal, what are we doing here today on your table?
Hand finishing the wild rice. So after it's been cooked and danced on and winnowed, they bring it over to me, and I just pick up all the loose ends of the rice that has never made it to be winnowed. It didn't come off in the process. So we have to do it piece by piece, one at a time, one kernel at a time. It's quite long. We've been sitting here for how long? Yeah, we've been sitting here for 2 or 3 hours. Yep, and Caitlin came along and took our bag, and boom, it's gone.
Just a little scraping of hide preparation. And this one we're just going to flesh this moose hide out. It's been a little tough because it was frozen. But it's coming along. It's going to be a drum skin. We're just going to split the hair off and make a drum skin and sorts of different. Basically, you want to just get it flesh first. So you can stretch them, but then you have to take them off, take the hair off anyways, because it should be soaked either in lye water or they can boil them in ashes. Usually, all mine, I keep the hair in. The hair, so it's a different process.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's the brain tan. I use a liquid tan, which is more of a commercial tan, because I make hats and mittens, and I don't want my hair to slip.
So what are
So, top. And so that's one of the points I talk about. So that was from our fall harvest last year. And then we had all the station. I'm going to bring that up as well. So I'm going to start this off with this slide here. It's a picture from Louis Schultz's book. So top by top at the historical gathering. This is pretty much the same thing. So here goes. And then like I said, so it's building off of last year's discussion in the speaker series. There we focused mainly on the intro part, and then we try to get through this first part really quick, really fast, without leaving it out. So if it's your first time hearing it or listening to it, we're all on the same page. But before we start, and if I had more than 2 hours, I would start at the creation story and kind of what I've learned so far, which is again very little. But I try to use as much as I can. But I'm gonna skip forward a bit into our migration story and how I use a lot of this information to when I'm out there, when I'm thinking about these different things, not only in the capacity of business side and CRM, but there's the whole other side of how we think about intellectual property and research. So I'm going to go through 3 different. So I'm going to pick 3 spots, and I usually go with 2, 3, and 6, and that's kind of how I build this one. So in that beginning of our creation story, and it's always this, and you can see it over here. There's that megashell that's coming out here, and then so with that breath of life that's going through that megashell, no, we're thinking about that, and that's so understanding that creation story in kind of like learning little bits and pieces of it. it's the foundation for why this happens. So that megashell, that breath of life, and so we have this migration happens. When they talk about it, they say many strains ago, 500-year-long journey. And it was through these prophecies that happened. And part of these prophecies are this megashell coming out of the water and telling us to move inland. And so it was this vision of needing to protect our culture, needing to protect everything that was coming in settlers in coming into Canada. So there's some dates that are thrown out, but I don't usually like to use dates a lot. So that we would go to this main spot, and we would be there until that next shelter opened. So that first one come up to go to this place, and for that after they're there, when the next shelter comes out of water, they move to this second one here, get you to or the place of the thunder and waters. And so that's also called Niagara Falls. And if you've ever been to Niagara Falls, and you just stood there, you just close your eyes and listen, you can hear that thunder and water that's coming over them. And so even, think about all that like sound pollution that's going on today. So, back then you're gonna be able to hear that miles away, kilometers away. So it's this place that there's a group of people there. And it's good, I'm gonna bring this up in the first few slides of how important something like Indigenous knowledges or traditional knowledge, oral traditions can be for accompanying things like archaeology. And it changes our political landscapes, it changes our view on why these places are important. There's a phrase in the archaeological standards that says places that are spiritually important or places that have historical or oral tradition lands. And we don't use that often. Nobody in like the CRM industry actually uses that. And then it gets really problematic because it's usually non-Indigenous archaeology stuff. So the next one I want to talk about is that third stopping place along the Detroit River. That's that creation of the Three Fires Confederacy of the Gaming Society. And so part of that, there's the three communities that are arising. So that's the youngest brother, the Potawatomi, the keepers of that sacred fire. And I'm going to talk a bit about something like council fire in the Treaty of Niagara Belt and kind of how that ties into it. And how important that role is for that nation. And the second brother, the middle brother, is the Ogawa, the trade alliance brothers. They deal with a lot of these different aspects for other nations. And one of the areas that I was looking into were like the Twin villages outside of the southwestern of Georgia Bay. And when the Jesuits got it, they know that there was Huron with Ogawa and Canaanites. So I think I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. For the Anishinaabe impact on Southern Ontario, it's very likely. And that's rooted in the foundation of what Anishinaabe is. It's that idea that we're hunting nomadic and we're more sparse. So when we think about archaeology, we leave little impact. We leave little behind on kind of how it is. So there's not much in the archaeological record for things like our buildings or being able to find them. And one of the things they noted when they got there was that they grew a lot of tobacco. And so there's some of the fur traders, we call them the tobacco people. And then that got me thinking even more. It's like, wow, what is the one thing we do as Indigenous people is we always, every time we want something, every time we ask for something, or we receive something, if I want information, if I want somebody to sing a song, if I want somebody's knowledge, I offer facts. And so that whole story, there's many stories that kind of go with how important that becomes. And one of those stories that I heard was that Anabush and his father were always like back and forth. And when they finally got tired of fighting, and his father's like, you know what, let's come to peace together. And so what he did with Anabush is he lit a pipe. And he smoked a pipe with Anabush, and that was his first time. He really liked it. He's like, I like this is doing my thing. So when Anabush was interacting with people and humans, that was one of the first things he gave him was tobacco and that pipe sharing. And so that's that reason. That's one of those reasons why we offer that medicine first. That's the first thing that was given to us. Anytime we want to take something, anytime we want to take medicine or harvest, that's what we do. We're offering. It could be other things. That's going to be one of those components. And then that was weird too. I was like, oh, Dawa were trade alliances, and now they're in encampments with the Huron. So that tracks kind of how we think about it. And one of the things that we do when we're building relationships with other communities, with other people, other nations, is there's that exchange of tobacco. So when they get there, they're known as the people that grow tobacco. It's powerful. That really opened my eyes how underlooked we look at it. And then when we skip ahead and talk about the sixth one, the prophecy that mentioned that came out of the water was go to the place where food grows on water. We know in that wild rice. And so when we think about a lot of those different staples that we use today still, we look at it like our species, and wild rice being one of the main staples. And, wild game, sometimes a lot of people use maple sugar or maple syrup. Whitefish and berries. How do you react with every type of feast? Those are no matter what we're going to have those in. So it becomes this like identity for us, which is this inclusion of importance. And so when we get there, we have this war, and this war is over. That's not over all the land. It's not over all the any other resources, but over that wild rice. And so then through these wars, there's peace and it's back and forth. And it's not as cut and dry. We were just at war with this nation for many years, and then we stop. I think there's a different view on how we think about war or think about alliances in a different mindset or in a different way. So with that, it is all this knowledge share. Every time we get together as a nation, we gift things, or we get things gifted to us. I think about our own community is, when we became heavily Christianized, we lost them, not most of them. And so we're not having a lot of communities we recognize them, and we would gift a lot of those teachings and culture away. Say, can you hold on to this? So one day we can. Hopefully we'll come back to it where we can have it. So those are the three, hopefully kind of wrap up. And then so this is a part of the mural that we have across the school here. And I think it's near the end. And there's many things there. The last one, sorry, I forgot, was the Ojibwe, the Alice Club. And one of the jobs to be the keeper of knowledge and conveying all those songs, all those teachings, and understanding those and sharing them. So that top of that tree line is some of those examples that you might find on the birch bark store. But I really want to talk about sort of like the symbolism of this middle part and its view and how I can depict it. I know my nephew did a recital in the last series or the series before. So I learned a lot from him just sitting and listening. And so that was really powerful. But what I take a lot from this is that philosophy or that those mindsets that we have. We're always thinking about those past ancestors and those what we have to do going forward. Think about this 7 generations behind and 7 generations forward. And we'll look at that the child that's there And some people kind of reference that as like inspire or that we're in time now. And then some will also think about that as it's like a moving time. So there's no, there's no like 2010 to 2030 is the age-wide generations. What we're doing today in and so when we get when I think of that, I often we always talk about this word as cultural revitalization and things like that is a word that keeps getting brought up. But something like culture is evolving, and so what we have today is our culture. And so what we're doing to get more back to moving forward is going to be this evolving, using Zoom to tell stories now. And over the last 2 years, I've done openings or things like that through an online method without us even thought about or even pushed to do it. So we're going to get this evolving of what tradition is. But I don't know, that's a whole other conversation that we could sit for a couple hours. What I really want to talk about is really just this last picture. I use this one a lot. So it's the silver covenant chain. And what I'm going to kind of talk about with this first part is all Indigenous ideology, Indigenous philosophy, or how you want to describe it, just Indigenous thought. And then I'm going to go back to all the legislation that happens. So I'm going to kind of go back and forth in this time. And keep everybody's attention. So I'm going to go through this Indigenous reviews. I'm going to go through all this legislation reviews and then see how it's kind of intertwined. So if you ever listen to Alan Corrigan, he talks really in depth about this belt here, how to make the First Nation. So definitely look him up. So I'm going to recap some of the stuff that I've learned listening to him. So that belt, they were given in 1763 the Royal Proclamation Act. And it was this paper to basically they had to buy some communities that was here. And in order to do that, they had to go into trees, go into these paper trees. And before this, there's this technology of walking out that were used along all of the East Coast side. I think it's clam shells, if I remember, which go from Nova Scotia all along that East Coast to the northern East Coast. And so it became like this very important tool to build those relationships between nations. And so in Settlers Guide, they recognized that and they tried to commoditize that. But it was never meant for that. It was just meant for those relationships between other nations or even new people. So there were different forms. Sometimes it was a full belt, sometimes it was just like a string of beads. But what I really like about this one is that idea of what it represents or what it means. And so 1763, that Royal Proclamation comes out, and so there was all these nations that go to meet at Niagara Falls with the crown. And so when they're there, they go back and forth to that meeting, that council, and they couldn't come up with it. They couldn't agree together. They couldn't come to terms. So they took it back, and then in 1764 they came back with this belt. And so we got to do it the way they made treat. So along with that paper, they come out with this to make it like a somewhat official in their eye. But when they talk about this belt, they talk about we're gonna stand side by side and bind our hands in friendship with a piece of rope. And they talk about that, they're like, oh no, rope's pretty weak. It's gonna get brittle. It's gonna break real quick. So they thought about it, and they decided, no, let's bind our hand by a chain bind. And they're like, yeah, that's good, but it's gonna rust, it's gonna break, just like the rope did. So then they came back, they're like, okay, well, how about a chain of silver? So that's what they decided on. We're gonna bind our hands by a chain of silver. but they recognize, they said, it's gonna run, or it's gonna tarnish, just like that iron did. But what they can do is they can pull it out and they can polish that chain and renew that friendship. So they said, yeah, that's cool. Let's do that. Either every year, every time the council, every time they got together, they would pull that belt out. And everyone would have to stand up and read that belt. When you read that belt, you go through what your obligations are, what you expected, what was a part of that, what you had to do to uphold that friendship, that treaty. And it was we wouldn't leave until everybody kind of in that room was under the same understanding. So if it was council fire, it could take days, it could take a week, and it wouldn't leave until then. It was a consensus base. And so the second half of that story is this idea that the crown let go of their end of that belt. They let go of their obligations and their duties for that. Before that, and so when I think about that too, it's 1964 of everybody's under this assumption that we're making these strides to work together and be along this kind of same path together and live amongst each other. So I think about the war came up, and this is happening for communities all over, where more percentage of Indigenous population sent people to war, and more people volunteered to go to war than the communities outside the Indigenous communities. And then I was thinking, like, when I first read that, I was like, why would we want to fight for a nation that we've been at odds with? And maybe it isn't as black and white as we look at it and we think about it. You know, there was these attempts to be at peace with each other, to live alongside each other. And so every time we had an issue, they would come up and say a lot of the language, like, Father, you said I could harvest. Father, you said I could hunt. Father, you said, you know, you promised that we could live alongside you. And then they would figure it out. So when they let go of their end of it, they stopped coming to council fire meeting, they let go of their end of the belt, they stopped coming to polish that chain. And that's where there's a lot of this negativity and there's a lot of this damaging things that happen to our culture start to take it, start to kind of go down. Oh, so that's why I brought that up. Because that idea is ingrained into all of the paper treaties. That's that idea that we're going to work side by side, we're going to work together. And so if you're ever looking at like all the paper treaties that come afterwards, this is that mindset, this is that ideology that's when we were trying to understand what we were thinking, or how we were thinking back then. This is things like these that come before these paper documents, things that come before this academic or Western mindset. Is starting to understand some of this stuff, because this is the other side that doesn't get recorded. I was doing some, I was listening to this podcast, and they were talking about this idea of if I wanted to do like an ethnography and I wanted to record it, and I went to Tyrell and I said, Tyrell, teach me about that song you just sang. And when Tyrell would tell me, he'd say, I'll sing you a song, this is what it means. Mark taught me this, and Alan taught Mark it, and he got that song from Ken. And but so when the researchers would take that, they're like, oh, the song is from Tyrell, and they would leave out those steps that were behind the song. That was common practice. And you lose a lot of things like that. You lose where that song traveled, you lose where that song comes from, or if it came from a spiritual background, if it comes from, if it was composed by a modern singer. And so like that's wild to think about it. Like how much you lost, or how much didn't you record because it didn't seem important enough to keep. Now the choice. And then hopefully I can get through this real quick. So now we're going to go through some legislation, things that got me to where why I do this. This is the foundation for how communities are involved. And then I'm going to try to put a little nice bow at the end to describe how these things have impacted their ideas. So I'm going to take back a bit. I did this podcast with UTM. Well, I think that was really fun. We just did like the opening, like, hey, can you guys help us with the intro? So we sang the Indigenous song, and we did it. It's like cross with Mi'kmaq composer. So 1799, 1493, 291, 1493. There was a papal decree aimed to justify Christian domination. And that was used in all like the developing worlds, United States, Australia, New Zealand, and the Americas, Asia, Africa. And it was to push that idea that you just go and conquer lands, conquer waterways. And so now we look at something like UNDRIP, that's that foundation for not only Canadian, and I'm gonna bring it down of like international level or Canadian law, Ontario law, and how all those have like shaped each other, and how we can use them. For something like this, what from that podcast, there was this like Honorable Stephen Point out of BC. And I really like this what he said. So the churches and the government didn't come one day and say, hey, you know, we did something wrong, sorry, can you forgive us? Elders had to bring this matter to the Supreme Court of Canada. And so that works really well too. Not only what they were talking about, Indigenous law, something like archaeology, something like environmental rights and protection. It covers the board. It's not until we raise the issue that we have to, not until we have to have all these people going out to create problems or create issues and fight for that right to even be involved in this whole process. So from when that happened, you know, there was the 2007 apology from Steve Harper. Two primary objectives of the residential schools were to remove and isolate children from their homes, their families, tradition, and culture, and to assimilate them into dominant culture. These ideas were based on the assumption that Indigenous communities were inferior and unequal. There's that quote from that time, who's killing me, meaning the child. So a cornerstone of that 2007 settlement agreement. So this, I'm going to quote that podcast now for a couple of slides because it was really good. I liked what she said. A cornerstone of this 2007 settlement agreement was the TRC, providing a unique opportunity to educate all Canadians on the residential school system. The survivors could have likely gotten paid more, and the government would have preferred that the survivors didn't open up about their past. Then they recognized it would be a positive step in forging a new relationship between Aboriginal peoples and other Canadians. A relationship based on the knowledge of our shared history, respect for each other, and a desire to move forward. The survivors fought for Canada and the TRC, not only having suffered the first time, but having to relive and tell their stories in the horrible ways in which they'd suffered at the hands of the state. The TRC is a gift to Canada, and I encourage everybody to be grateful for it. So call to action like 57 and 28, they point out that importance of education. Treaties, why they're there, what they mean, what they understand. Senator Warren Sinclair in there talks about what we needed people to understand that we're sophisticated societies that had laws. And again, it speaks on the damaging narrative that was out there. You look at old images, you know, even from like early 2000s, and the farther you go back, the more damaging they become. A lot of racial imaging. And so that's what we see. That's what everybody's seeing growing up. That's what everybody knew about Indigenous communities. So Mary Wilson, another commissioner of the TR, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, came up with that term. Reconciliation is not a spectator sport. You have to be engaged. you have to, and people have not yet embraced this idea. And so that's that national. So the UNDRIP is our international level. That framework for UNDRIP is in there. It talks about something like we have a right to, Indigenous people have a right to maintain their culture, maintain their ceremony, do the practices. And so that's some of that legal framework that we use. For Canada, it's a fun fact, maybe not a fun fact, it's just a fact. There was 3 countries that didn't accept the UNDRIP article in first. That was United States, Australia, and Canada. So they were one of the last ones to accept. And I think 2021, it got ascended into law, which doesn't really mean too much because they still have a clause where it can't affect their current laws. But making steps, I suppose. And then so in the TRC, they say one of the calls to action is to accept the UNDRIP articles as they are. So it supports that too. And so those articles in something like archaeology is that basis, those spiritual places and those ancestral objects. So now the duty to consult. This is our Ontario. This is the creation of my position, my job, the Department of Consultation and Accommodation. Ontario, as a Crown, has a legal obligation to consult with Aboriginal peoples where it contemplates decisions or actions that may adversely impact established Aboriginal or treaty rights. Ontario is committed to meeting its duty to consult with First Nations and Métis communities. So again, they're all important because that's how we start to get involved. That's how we are forcing the hand of archaeologists. That's how we're forcing the hand of the government opponents to say you no longer can make those decisions on our behalf. So in Ontario, 80% of all archaeological sites are Aboriginal. And they're held these they're called standards or guidelines. Standards, they're just like the basic minimum that they have to do to complete that work. And the guidelines, they're those steps beyond what the standards are. And following the guidelines is considered a matter of professional judgment. So that's where we run into issues a lot. And so I'm going to go back a little bit for on the duty to consult. Is it lays out the role. There's 3. There's the role for the Crown. There's the role for Aboriginal communities, and there's a role for third parties. So third parties can be proponents, and then they in turn shift that ability to an archaeologist. And obviously the Crown and Aboriginal communities. But in there it states something like Aboriginal communities, it says we have to make our concerns known. We have to come together and work on a reasonable solution and in a timely manner. I was like, well, that's some weird phrasing. And I was like, that kind of sounds like it reminds me of that silver coming chain. We're supposed to get together and work together and figure out what's best course of action. But anyways, so going back to this is the standard for engagement. So this is the word, but I got a nice graph that I grabbed from, I think I have it in here. Well, what I really want to point out is this is the wording that's in the standards and guidelines that's used throughout Ontario, is that consultant archaeologists are only required to engage with the communities at stages 3, section 3.4, which is at the end of it, when they determine if there's enough cultural heritage or valuable interest to move on to stage 4, which is that full mitigation. And for those of you that didn't miss the intro to archaeology, I can put it in this slide. Or only when the site is known to have or appears to have sacred or spiritual importance or is associated with traditional land uses or geographical features, cultural heritage, interest, subject of Aboriginal oral histories. And you might be thinking, who's making these determinations? Not us. It is, if we're not even involved until near the end, then who's making those decisions, who's making those calls? And that's typically non-Indigenous archaeologists. So those legislation that we were talking about, and the role for Aboriginal communities, you have to make our concerns known. That's not what we did. We created a standards and guidelines to say, if you are working in our traditional territory, we want you to follow our guidelines, our standards. That's baked right into that community consult. So we're making our concerns known. This is how we do it. We're saying, as soon as you think about archaeology, as soon as you think about removing a landscape, as soon as you think about destroying anything that's important to us, we have to be involved. You can't determine on our behalf if something is sacred or spiritual or important to us. Now, it's a little harder said than done, or it's a little harder done than said. But that's the step we take. So this graph, I'm going to sum it up a little bit. The development in archaeological site on it's located with the provincial policy statement. It just like talks about land use plan, and sometimes it is bypassed. So the municipalities, here take your building permit, you don't have to do archaeology. It gets destroyed, it gets removed from the landscape. It's excavated. That next bracket down is located. They do this quick one. It's called the stage 1, stage 2. That's their historical background researches. They don't move into like test pitting or test surveys. Did they find enough? Again, we're not involved. If so, they did, they'll move on to the next stage under their idea, and then they can determine just in the next one. They're doing that stage 3. And if they have enough, they're like, oh, maybe we should do this full excavation. We should do like, that's the things you see on TV when they're like block, digging up an entire site. And that's the only time that they're forced to involve communities. And so even after communities are involved, there's very few sites that are protected or saved. I only know a couple that, and I've only seen one that was. It was only a portion of this village site. So even after we're engaging in a part of the process, we have little say in how that process goes, and that's changing slowly. But that's when we get into next is that perspective change. Legislatively, we have no power to change to do anything. And so even if a site is mitigated or excavated, it still ends up being excavated or removed from the landscape and destroyed. It all means the same thing. It doesn't make a difference. If there's a housing development going there, if there's a pipeline going there, if there's a highway going there, we can no longer collect medicines. We can no longer go hunting there. It's removed from the landscape. So those end up being all the same thing there. So research that focuses, how do they control archaeology? Research that focuses non-Indigenous narratives, interpretations, there's commercialization of heritage that benefits the CRM industry and other stakeholders. And there's policies that marginalize Indigenous people through lawmaking and through stewardship process. So we talked a bit on like research, like that idea of what everybody bases their research on these days is old accounts. Well, not only that, but a lot of that early archaeology, there was no second thought into things like Indigenous ideologies or Indigenous thought. And it was only from their people. But those became a lot of the foundations for research that happens after. It uses that. And so even research today, it's like this extractive method. They go in the community, they extract all this information, and the community doesn't benefit at all. Even if it's good intentioned people, they're doing a lot of research that communities don't benefit at all from. And so then that second point, it's just that commercialization. It's a monetized business to go in and excavate our cultural materials, our cultural remains, instead of just letting the be. And the way it's built up. And it's built badly because they will you benefit if you bid the lowest. And that's how the whole industry is built around, is who can bid the lowest and do the job for the cheapest. So it doesn't lead to good work in the end. who controls archaeology in Ontario is the governments and the policymakers, scholars and institutions, and professional archaeologists. What's not on there is Indigenous communities. And so one of the points that I usually bring up is that idea of what happens to the artifacts after they're excavated underground. And so the answer to that is they are held in trust by the licensed archaeologists for the people of Ontario. And then the way that it's worded is if you ask a community member, if you ask random ones and you say, hey, are you a Canadian citizen? Are you a person, are you an Ontario citizen? There's a lot of them who say no. They say, no, I'm part of a sovereign nation. And that's how they identify as Irish. So the way that's worded is sets are out of ground and it's held in trust for the people of Ontario. Then we lose that ownership, we lose that connection, that physical connection to the earth. And so if we want to repatriate something, we want to rematriate something. And in Canadian law, we don't have anything that says they have to. It's all good faith or relationship building with the CRM company, with repositories. There's nothing to force them to give those materials back. So what does this mean for Indigenous communities? There's no formal venue for contesting archaeology, or there's no formal training. There's no streamlined training for universities or colleges, and there's no formal advocate to advise communities when they're faced with aggressive or non-compliant archaeologists. We're pretty fortunate in the idea that we have a lot of active communities in this area. So we've been able to build up our capacity. We've been able to build up a team with other nations to fight for better archaeology to be done, for a more considerate practice to be done. But there's communities in the north, or there's communities that might be struggling with different issues that don't have the capacity. They don't have the ability to fight an archaeologist company that's pushing them around. You know, before we had an entire department with office staff and 30 plus field liaison representatives, there might have been just one person in that there. And usually it's like a lands of membership, and they have to deal with all these other issues there. And then you have archaeologists that are just sending them all these different files saying, hey, you want to be a part of this? And they don't get to. They assume that it's consultation. So what's my time? Okay, good. Sweet. So this is I'm now back in I'm gonna get these guys back up to stage shortly because I really like to send during my presentations and incorporate a lot of those ideas. So I'm going to talk about Indigenous perspectives and I'm going to talk about social change and what that looks like in the community and how it's shaped how the field of archaeology is done locally. So it's building up to this idea that where we can kind of use ourselves as a case, looking at MCFN or even local communities on how we've impacted change, non-legislative, but just by that social change. And then we can go from there. We can lead our, we can make an impact. We have made an impact in something like the CRM and the business side of doing better, doing more quality work. And so now we can translate that, how we can be involved in after everything that happens, after it's all excavated, that intellectual property that's associated with it. So spiritual connection that is associated with us. So this is a little bit, we were doing this, our historical gathering, it was like one of our first or second. My career path at the time is I was going to be a culinary. I was going into culinary. So I was catered, I think 2 or 3 days of that historical gathering. And so I was there in the kitchen, and one of the elders at the knowledge groups at the time came up. She's like, hey, come out in the morning, we're in the pipe ceremony. And we pulled out, we pulled out Peter Jones' pipe. I was like, I didn't really know anything about history at all. Well, I didn't really have an interest in it. So they pulled out the pipe. We did a pipe ceremony, and it hadn't been out in over 100 years. Yeah, maybe I didn't. And then so it was like, as soon as I like used it, touched it, I was like, wow, this is pretty wild. You know, just having that like that spark or that mind to physical connection, the past. And so I started that journey. And I was like, maybe I'll take it before I go into culinary. I was doing like 60 hours in the kitchen, a single job. I was doing archaeology. I was like, I'll do that. Let's do that. And I ended up enjoying it a little bit too much now. Didn't do anything after high school. I'm doing this. But anyway, so and then it was really cool for me because it led me to what I do now, what I'm about now. And before it was just being part of it and being part of excavations. And actually, Sarah Clark here was like one of the first ones to say, hey, come and do this talk with me. And I was up there for like 5 minutes and I was sweating the whole time. And I messed up half of what I was going to say. And then right after that, there was one question, and he didn't mean anything negative by it. But so we were doing the mushroom. And when he gets up, the first question he asked me, like, how are you able to do that? I was like, I don't know that answer. How are you? And that one was tough because it's the residential school. That fits for so many monitors or community FLRs. It's like, it doesn't hit you at when you're there sometimes. Sometimes you're driving home and you're like, damn, watching all this destruction, watching all our ancestral materials or objects just getting taken away, and really affects you emotionally, physically, and spiritually sometimes. We always talk about every time we interact with another being, we give a lot of spirit, and to give spirit to the stones, our oldest relatives. We give spirit to so many things, and so when we're out there and we're just dealing with these church materials, these church neptons, church flakes, you know, for most people it's just a stone. It's just a piece of garbage. And maybe not, maybe flakes are that. A lot of people are that usually, but that connection is there, and it's not until those moments hit you, and so all these emotions go through how we have to kind of struggle through that. And like I was saying, I don't know yet, but I haven't learned anything to deal with that. This idea that we're being a part of removing it. And then so you amplify that and find ancestral remains on the site. And I've seen it, you know, really damage people or struggle to be part of a site that has to do with a burial site investigation. It's hard to deal with. It's really stressful. It's really difficult. I got sidetracked. On the line so it brought me to this. It brought me to speaking in public, and so I started with that talk, and now I do this pretty frequently. Go to a lot of universities and conferences and speak about this, speak about perspectives and things like that. And it's really helped give me a want and a need for more knowledge and more base and to learn a little bit at a time. I think I try to get like a new word in the language every time I do the opening or every time I do it. And like one day I'll be able to do this whole conversation in Anishinaabe, and you guys all have to figure out what I'm saying. But so last year we're working on that song was super important to me, is because it talks about that relationship with the allies. It talks about those relationships that we're going to need to move forward. And so part of that reiteration committee, Jack Horvath from Kirk Lake, I think, and I think Daniel King, they were saying from our community, they're going through and they're like, hey, I think we found Peter Jones Bank. So that's pretty cool. It's in the back in New York. So they got their own rules. They have like an egg truck that you can go through. So we're going through that process. It's tough. One of the things, listening to Margaret, when she talks a lot about the language, things like that. And what she always said, like every time we figured out the rules to play by, every time we make strides in legislation and working our way through that, they change the rules after we figure it out. And that's like one of those institutionalized methods or methods to keep us always moving. So like, oh, that's weird. 10 years later, what brought me to this is now I get to do this for somebody else potentially. And there's a cool one too with Prince of Wales out of Hiawatha. They sent out a bunch of macaques to, and so Prince of Wales, the King of Wales, full story. But they're like, hey, get out and go learn something. Go to the New World. That's the Prince. Prince had to leave. Go on a life journey. And so they gave a heads up to all the communities in this area. They're like, Prince of Wales is gonna come by. And so we're gonna make a bunch of birch bark baskets. And so they did. And so when he got there, they gave him, I think there's 13 different baskets. And so when he went back to Wales, I think it's Wales. I could be wrong on that. They have all these in there. And so they're coming back in April, this month. They're going to be here for 6 months. And so we're going to bring them in. We're going to do a ceremony with them sometime in April. And they're going to be open to view. I believe in Peterborough. But if anybody's interested in that, I can give you that information somewhere in here. And then, so now we're going to talk Indigenous perspectives, social change. So this is a description, or this is an artistic rendition from Emily Damstra. This is along, I believe, the Walter Boone Trail in Cambridge. There's two of them that happened. And so one of the other persons that kind of helped me along the way was Paul Richard in this like public speaking. So like he got these, once he got a commission, his family was a part of the model for him. But what he wanted like positive images. I mean, before, like there's not a lot of positive images of Indigenous people in media, or maybe not race. But so social change is one of the areas is, we'll start with in the community. And how I kind of describe it is this idea that, you know, we're a small community. I think we have 2,800-ish band members working on reserve and off reserve. So our working plot, I don't know what it is, but there's not a huge working force. And so we have 5 or 7 people in our office full time in our department. We have 35 plus field liaison representatives at any time. Now I think 50 is here. And so it has this like vibe of like a minor community where every family and every household has somebody involved in this one industry, this one sector, you know. And so that slowly is having what I'm kind of noticing or picking up on is that ripple effect. Well, every community is starting to talk about archaeology. Every community has more of a base knowledge in our own community of what archaeology is and what you can do with it. And so now we have that opportunity. We have that opportunity to work in our cultural materials every day. We have our opportunity to do a job that's land-based learning. You know, that's a key word that we often use in like research. And there's not many jobs that allow us to live in the financial side of the world that we have to in the modern world, and work in our and work in our culture and work in being a part of it. And so for me, like that, there was that connection to that pipe that opened that up to me. Sometimes the connection of a stone projectile point or a piece of pottery or just being on site in that area, being in that energy. It can be many of those things. So we have all these people now that are hands-on or they're able to kind of go out in the field and to do this work. And then the second one is that social change for archaeologists. You know, I talked about all this legislation that happens. That last piece was 2010. And like how I was saying that line in there says we're not supposed to, they don't have to involve us until this certain point. And what now in this area over the last 12, 13 years, we're involved in those earlier portions, not all the time, but it's becoming more and more. And that wasn't because they said, oh, you know, we feel that we're going to start inviting communities earlier. It was because communities took that active interest, that active role, and they pushed for that all along the way. You know, those first few years for communities are always rough. There's always that slow buildup for capacity, slow buildup for knowledge, or even just like battling something like racism that's still prevalent in a lot of industries. And you're thinking like, you know, this is the whole industry built around removing our ancestral names and objects. And it still seems like we're not about, especially when we got involved in the beginning. So that's what's really changing. And I describe that when you think like recycling. You say, well, we have to start recycling in the schools. And so when they grow up, they're just doing it as second nature. That's kind of how that took hold. And so that's what we're seeing now is where like all of those people who worked alongside like when they just started in the field as a field technician, things like that. So well, now they're field directors, now they're PMs or owners of companies. They've seen how important it was, they've seen how important, how worked up we get when a company tries to cut corners, how worked up we get when they mistreat or misrespect or disrespect or mishandle those materials, and we see that firsthand. They see us, they get physically upset. Sometimes we're arguing, sometimes we have to shut sites down, or sometimes it's just being friendly. Sometimes it's saying, you know, this community member is coming out every day and talking to me, you know, or I'm able to learn a different perspective. And so that's snowballing. And so now what we have to do is turn a lot of that social change into legislative change. But I'm trying to stay positive. So social change has been good, you know, for the most part. And you know, there's always like the problem with that is there's always a lot of you don't have to do it, but it's becoming more acceptable to go above and beyond with those standards, with those guidelines. And one of the things I forgot to mention before I leave this slide. Now we'll go. Yeah. When I was talking about the legislation, and in there it says that when I was saying that as soon as those artifacts come on the ground, we lose that ownership, or that we're not involved in the process anymore. And it's something like that, the Ontario Standards Guidelines, it's in direct conflict when it states things like that. It's in direct conflict with UNDRIP, it's in direct conflict with TRC. So that those foundations, legal frameworks is what we can use to start hopefully unraveling a lot of that back end stuff. So the next one, I'm actually bringing you guys up because I want to talk now. Major check. It's kind of like this portion here. Okay. So, kind of talk about archaeology. What you can learn, you can learn kind of what you can do, group references, time periods, season, year that they're occupied, how they're butchered, what kind of tools they use when they butcher them. Did they use animal bones for the purpose of it? well, again, there's a lot of podcasts, but the one with Keelan Musgrave. And he was talking about this one food research project, food sovereignty project out in New Zealand. Is in this Indian community. And so when the researchers got there, she's like, as soon as she got there, she sees hairs running all about. She's like, oh, there's food right there. That's what I'm using. She was a little kid, and she's like, hey, why don't you guys eat those hairs? I'm doing a food sovereignty project. They eat those hairs. And the kid's like, oh, no, don't eat that. Don't eat that. She's like, well, why not? She's like, and the kid's like, I don't. So he's like, I go ask my mom. Maybe she knows. And the researcher goes ask the mom. And so he asked the mom, and the mom was like, oh, no, don't eat those. I was like, why not? Guys, we need food. Like, it's good food. No, don't eat those. Don't eat those. And she couldn't explain why. She's like, go ask my mom. She was there. They made those calls. And they made those decisions. So they all go to the grandma. And they get there and like, hey, we're doing this food sovereignty project. We see all these hairs running, but everybody says you don't eat it. Why don't you kill it? So she started laughing. She's like, you know what? Back in the day, they went 2 years without seeing a moose, and all they had to eat was hairs. So when the moose came back, they never wanted to see a hair on the plate again. And then, so it's something, like there's not. When we review something like or materials from the site, there's not always this like scientific answer. It's just like this fun story of like how things can change with the community. And so there's all backstories that we can use why things are important. So this is just like a deer bone tool thing, and it splits off all these like potential possibilities for something like the alien. And that's cool. I got perfect things for this because Harold here has a bunch of traditional he's getting dancing now in the alien. But he makes songs and he's like a jukebox and who knows the instrument like that. So every time I do this, I'm like, I can never remember the song that I want to do. It's here it is. It's like, we're gonna do a song called the Wawa Sketch Song, and it's a sneak up or is it a old style? So I said first, and so before I preface that, is I want to talk about that, what it represents, what it means, and so if you go to Palo, and everybody here has, and so what we do is the idea of Palo in the modern day is talks about gathering together. And what you're doing is you're telling a story. You're saying every time you're dancing around that circle, you tell a story. So if we see that traditional out there, he might be like looking like he's hunting, he's grabbing a bow, he has a spear. We're going to go around that circle, and as soon as he finds his hunt, he might dance around that. And he's telling your story through that art of dancing. And that's what we do with our songs too. We do Palo, we're there for socializing. I'm like, Carol's gonna tell this story through this song. And so that's what we do that. It's gonna be these piece portraying that. So one of my favorite moments in Powwow is that connection between that dancer and those singers. Is that a dancer around, sometimes they'll stop at that drum. And to see that moment with that song and that dancers connecting is like doing one of the most powerful things. And you can see that, you can feel that, especially if you're right beside it. So all those things traditional have, like knuckles or all these different pieces of animal kind of all over in there. So you hear that slow crunching around. So we're gonna do this song, right? And they pretty much wrapped up. And so. It's just that the evolving of our topics, we 30 minutes left. Yeah. We're going about in 2 minutes. Our last comments. Yeah. Okay. We're in this time, especially locally, of we have to do it now. There's all the development happening. We have to dig up our sites. We have to do all this. And so another story is I was listening to this one about this site that was dug in BC. And so with old archaeology, they wouldn't even screw something. They would just take a shovel. And this kind of happens in another part of the world too. And it's not just here, but they would take a shovel and they're like, I see this, I see that. And then that's what they would record. Whatever they see, whatever they notice. And that's what they would record. And so the problem with that is that gets made into papers, made into research. And communities will take that research and they'll use that. They'll say, this was important to us because this is what this archaeologist said to us. This was important to us because this is what the research backed up. And so, this site, they used what we call is a 6mm mesh. And today, there's a site that has really small artifacts. We might use the smaller mesh, it's called a 3mm mesh, to catch that kind of information. So this site, had 6mm mesh they're using, and they had all the sand bones. And they're like, wow, it was mostly sand bones. They're like, wow, it must be super organic. And then a site nearby got one was good, and the same site. And they use that small connection. They're catching a bunch of herring bones. So they're swallowing, they're going through that bigger fish. And so it's just like a cautionary tale. You might not always have the best technology or the best methods today to get all the information you need. Because maybe the same bones weren't at Portage Pemmon, which is one of them. And so when they're revisiting that site, they're like, oh, there's actually a higher percentage of herring of in there, in that assemblage. So we get caught in this idea that we have to excavate everything now, and whatever we're doing now is the best way to do it, is the best way. We're recording it. And it's not even the best way. I've visited repositories, I've visited companies where they take things, and you look at like an old collection, and then you've had like there's 20% not there. Just lost in transportation, or they just got lost. People take these out to research them or whatever. You're just like a percentage of old collection that get lost. Or it's just like there's no convenience. The early way of dating things or documenting things could have been lost or could have been changed. So I pretty much talked about everything I'm going to talk about this slide, but now I'm just going to look at it and figure something else. I get this wrong all the time. Charles can correct me with these now. So how I describe it is when we're looking at something, we're looking at nature. So the Anishinaabe, our language is very descriptive, and not only our language is our kind of makeup on how we think about things. So in the back there's called wigwams. And so if you look outside this building, I can't remember the name of this building off the top of my head. I can but a lot of our buildings, whether it's like a bank, house, they'll have this word at the beginning of it, amit. And so the word that we use for beaver is amit. And so when we were watching that beaver, we said like, oh, look the way he builds his house. It looks like it keeps him warm. And so we're going to build our house the same way. So we mimic that. And so we copy that style of where it is. And so we pay respect and homage to that by naming that. Something like at the bottom here. I have some, I don't know if I might have took them out because I used to do the beginning. So if you remember the beginning slide where the video was, when they're doing wild rice in Roman, they're roasting in these like barrels. So like last fall we were there, and I'm like, oh, that's weird. What would we have used before we had these tin barrels? It's like, I don't know, maybe they just like threw them out in the sun. And then I was like, okay, see what this is called. They're doing the same things. Like a lot of that style, those way we do things, kind of like has this continuity. And so I do this like summer kids. And then the guy that does pottery, what he says is that what he does is he holds up like a vessel, pottery vessel. And then you hold up we're teaching kids that are like 10 to 14. So you hold up this pottery vessel and you hold up this like a ceramic plate that's there. A ceramic bowl, come in, anything that we find. And the ceramic bowls are usually like decorated with all these like prints on there. It's got a bunch of like floral patterns or designs. And it looks cool. It looks, it's like a fancy like China plate. So you ask the kids like, which one is more advanced technology? And most of them are like, oh, that one that has all the flowers on it. And like, well, what's going to happen if I put both of them in fire? Well, they probably both can explode. But so when we throw that power vessel on it, it's like it takes to that heat well because of the way it's constructed as well. That those inclusions that are in it help keep that vessel intact. So it's weird to that notion that Indigenous community or Indigenous people were less sophisticated. And it's kind of helping bridge this gap. I don't remember why I put this on here. Can't go on. But that's one of my favorite plants, wild ginger. Now I just got into mushroom boarding. I think it was probably right after we got back and was like, look at this mushroom. Everybody else has to see it. So that's came in the woods. I ate it, didn't die. That's good. So that was cool though. So I was following these deer. So I'm glad. That's why I was saying this song, I was saying the deer song while I watched sketch. I was following these deer that day. I was watching them out hunting. I don't think I could do it. But I was so very deer. I knew that. And I was watching these deer, and I was for like just like a good half hour. I was just taking pictures of mushrooms the whole time. And so the deer, and I see them go down and they eat these plants. And I was like, I'm gonna get close as I can. And I get like 10 feet away and they move. They were moving fast and far, like they didn't care about them. And then finally I'm like, what are they doing? They're going crazy. And they're eating wild ginger. And I was like, wow, that's weird. Just me watching deer. And then I found out the hugest wild ginger patch I've ever seen. Just observing nature. It was cool. This one was my garden. So that was a vlog. I don't know if it's the right story, but there's this word that I don't even remember the word. I heard the story once from Jamieson. I can't see. But he talks about this word that we use for hunting. And it's that idea that the fog is sitting there and it's just sitting there on that little pad and waiting by, just watching the insects go back. Until finally see one. And so that we have the word for hunting, that style of hunting that we used from watching that frog. Wish I could. That's pretty much it, guys. Just tell us all that.
So creepy. So I think we can have about 15 minutes to ask questions, but I think I'll ask the first question. So last year when we got Jordan to come in and do, well, we weren't in person, we were over Zoom. But did a similar session to this, and it went really well. We had like so many people show up on Zoom for it. But one of the questions or things that me and Jordan, Adam had talked about afterwards was, what do you do spiritually for yourself when you have to go out and dig up, essentially dig up your ancestors? What are your ceremonies that you have to do, and how do you take care of yourself? Because you go a whole, season, I guess you could say, digging up the past and, having to physically touch your ancestors, who have, perished in many ways. There has to be something that happens, emotionally or physically or mentally, spiritually. So how do you take care of yourself not just as a person from MCFN, but as an Indigenous person?
That's a tough one. And I kind of touched on it because I haven't found anything specific, and I don't. It's because why, but the idea that what they're doing this is not management. If that's the easiest way to put it, there's various communities or cultures that practice this idea of removing remains after they're interred and buried. And so we don't have to offer that. So we have like burial practices or burial ceremonies, but we don't have people like recite yet. What happens if I get a call from a construction company and well, they're not the remains, come deal. Somebody come do ceremonies. Not even remains, it's other things. You ever seen like a pipeline trail and they're just cut? You stand there after we cut the trees down and you just see this like fresh row of tree lines. And that was one thing. Well, that can just, and I know that happens all the time, but it's another thing to see something firsthand and how it is. So I'm going to go a little bit longer. Because what I think about is our creation story, not creation. Yeah, creation story. those creation of the world. I wish I had more time to like more to recite more about it, because I learned more about every time I tell a story. But that creation of the world, that the way one of the guys described it, is it just had these 4 rocks. And the first one is the world itself. Second one is that plant world. The third one was the animal world, and then the human world. And he's like, flipping out, sorry, your mind. So if I took that animal world, he says, and what would happen to the humans? Maybe they die. We just all become vegetarians and eat it. Okay, let's go back. That's what happens when we take out the plant world and it's not there anymore. Well, then we're going to all die because the animals don't eat meat, and then we can't eat the animals. What happens when we take out the world itself and everything else? We don't need, the world doesn't need us. The plant life doesn't need us. The animal world doesn't need us. We need all of it. And so our instructions were just to respect it in that. To respect every other world that's for us. That's our own job is to do, is to respect it. And so when we talk about the story, we talk about the time when the humans stopped that, and then we get into something like the Ice Age. Our stories around that of how humans stopped respecting the other world, and how we were punished by the creator, and she the spirits of the north came down and froze the world out. My original question. I'm not gonna let it. Oh, yes, what I do. Yeah, I don't know. So I've done many things. You've seen this earlier. We did smudging. It's an individual thing, and it's one of the things. Every time I read something from somebody, like, this is, or I'm gonna take language as an example. They're like, if I say something wrong, you never go up to someone and say, hey, you're saying that word wrong. You're saying Bama P, or you're saying Bama Pa. And you just say, this is how I say it. You try to go about it humbly. You never try to like say what you're doing is wrong. Something like written languages and things like that are so regionalized and modern, new, that there's when we think about it, really, there's not a really wrong way to think as long as we're going like that good mind. So what I do, me personally, I always use like smudging. It helps bring my kind of mind and my spirit back to this place. Sometimes it doesn't happen. Like I was in town in the car, and it just like hits me because we have like sometimes an hour and a half, 2 hour drive home, 3 hour drive home if there's traffic. And you just got to think about that all day. You got a cool time. So I'll do smudging. Or for me, like I got these bands, these protection bands, and traditional tattooing. And so when I got them done, that's what I was in it for. I was like, I handle these artifacts. I'm a person that really dives deep into what I'm doing and what I love. And so I love archaeology. And so to help kind of myself, that we got I got these protection bands done. And some of my family died, they're all there, and they kept. So we got them done, they do like stick and poke. And again, back to that song, or back to those different ways we used it, traditional tattooing. When we got them done, what they're doing the whole time, they sang for me. And they sang that first song we did. And I don't know if it was because that was my first tattoo, so, or if it was all the emotional thing, but I cried for every verse. Just bawling the whole time. And then I was laughing after that because I was looking at like research on traditional tattooing. And they have a bunch of scripts in there, and it was talking about that same thing. They're like, oh, these young guys, they just kept crying. They're trying to keep a brave face on for everything. They kept crying. It's like, oh, that was me. And I said that to Cheryl, and we were like, just laugh. We were both. So that's one of the things I did was to use what I know, use what I can, and everything comes after that. Like over the last year, 2 years now, picking up something like pipe ceremonies. And kind of like learning through practice. And being okay to make mistakes, being okay to do something wrong and have somebody say, hey, maybe you should try this, maybe you should try that. And type thing, and just being okay with that, being okay with having to face that didn't work for me, that didn't help me bring my mind back to here, didn't help me bring it's hard to deal with. So I tried a bunch of things, I've tried a bunch of things. Yes. Thank you. See if there's any on Zoom. You guys find artifacts from the whether it be pottery, heritage, or things like that, who determines which First Nation they belong to? That's a tough question. Yeah. I'll have it. It's this a lot of the times, and so nobody really has an answer. A lot of people smarter than me that still don't have an answer, but what a lot of the times we find out is so I'm doing it. There's if we're working in Toronto, there might be 5 or 6 different nations that are part of the project. And so what happens afterwards is if we can all agree together, that's usually the best outcomes. Sometimes we don't, sometimes there might be signifiers like it's the assemblage or what we're collecting points to a certain community's background. That's pretty tough to find, and especially for like Anishinaabe people that have this very low impact or very low research. I think it's more of a low research than low impact. It's a whole other discussion. So who's making the call? It could be none of the communities. That's what the legislation says. Legislation gives the power to the licensed archaeologists. In the more social side, the social change that I talk about, it's a lot of this. We just have meetings with all the other communities that are involved, and so that's what's starting to happen now. There's other places where we can all access things, where everybody's happy with that collection goes. Sometimes a site's only half dug, so there's this half over there, this half's over there, this half's in somebody's basement, this half in the garbage and dump somewhere. There's a lot of halves. So there's so many there's so many variables to that question, and it's like nobody has an answer. Nobody has a way to kind of figure that out. Sorry, that's a non-answer. That's a political answer. There's one in the chat.
You want to answer?
Are you finding there are Indigenous historical societies that are having a say in the process? I would say it really depends. And so the problem with their inclusion is the consultation framework sets up for nations to have a say. So there's like a consultation list for Ontario, so you have to deal with X, Y, and Z people if you work in this area. So if you're an Indigenous historical society, you might, if you're not on that list for consultation, you're not getting that forced entry. But there is a lot of, maybe I shouldn't say a lot, but there is a way for that to kind of get involved through good faith. And that's the crappy part, is like we're not a lot of people on the stage yet of doing that. Hopefully that answers it. And that I don't really know what to talk about that. Politics. Hi.
First of all, I just want to say, Jamieson, Jamieson cannot do today, and I really love your presentation. Thank you for all you do for our people. Our Office of Partner Consultation and Accommodation needs more people like you in it because you are one of the strongest leaders in this community. And I'm very proud of everything that you do, everything that you continue to do for not only us here today, but those who have still yet to learn to walk tomorrow. And you're one of my greatest heroes and role models. And I'm just so proud of you doing much. That wasn't my question. So the question to ask. So now, as a leading field liaison representative for Mississaugas and Credit First Nation, what is the best advice that you give to people who are just starting out in the archaeology field, whether they be FLRs from our community or another First Nation, or even just young archaeologists working in the field themselves? What's the best thing that you can tell
One, it's a hands-on job, so like there's a lot of like technical details I can point out. But one of the things I really try to stress with the new FLRs is this talk that Jai had is what I noticed is that stress, that level of what we're witnessing, what we have to deal with. People don't come back to work some years. Like they can only do 1 year, or they just quit, they just stop going. It's really hard emotionally and really spiritually to witness. So like that's for me, that's the most important thing for an Indigenous descendant to deal with, is like figure out what works for you, how you can handle it. There's not a lot of people that can do this. And that actually brings me back to that question now for any seasons. Maybe that's where it kind of ingrained itself. And I was like, I didn't know how to answer that, honestly. I didn't know how to answer that until maybe this moment. And everything that I've done is to answer that question of how can I do it? He didn't mean it in a negative way. He was curious. He had the same question. How am I as an Indigenous person able to partake in it? And that, so that would be my biggest, the thing I want to get to is like, not everything else doesn't matter, but what matters is keeping your strong mind for that and for why you're there to be a representative on behalf of the people.
Any other questions before we wrap things up?
This is a question or not. I do believe we have ceremonies for people, and there was a ceremony for someone. I don't know exactly how long it was, like ceremonial people that I know conducted this ceremony, and the ancestor appeared to this woman, and he got the one who went ahead, he traveled into the future. And one time, he said to that woman, so he asked the question, where am I? I don't recognize this place. When I left, everything was sacred. Every breath is sacred. That's what that spirit told that woman. And so when I've been working with the secretariat, and when I started there, the people running those GPR machines to be careful, because what you're doing, you're looking for work waves for missing from the up, and you probably treat it in a good way. And so I told them to shouldn't have told them, I suggested
that they smudge off of them. And then, maybe once a week, they do their sweat off and smooth their ancestors and get cleaned off. Because that, the ancestor that was found in Brantford in 2020, what they were putting in the to that utility line. They found an ancestor there, and that ancestor sat there for a year, decided what to do. What do you know about them? And so that ancestor is still sitting awesome. And I'm hoping that they're going to be able to put that back to rest, because it's not a good thing when we disturb our ancestors and we don't treat them with respect, and that we don't honor them. And so I guess I shouldn't. Anyway, that kind of weighs heavy on my mind. All that ancestor is sitting there. And when we used our pipes before ancestor was taken out, I made that promise that I would push to make sure that would go back in. And anyway, I wish that later and pays to a ceremony, pays to learn that. Because even in your story, the medieval existed before they left the East Coast. And that show you're talking about, the biggest that appears is that lodge. And those stopping places along the way. And some of the stories that you get from the show smoke, they're not told that way. Exactly. They're kind of cleaned up. And the little, you don't hear the full story. You just get it from that. And I was fortunate enough to hear the man who wrote that book tell that story and not leave out the parts and make it easy to read. And I encourage you to go listen in seminary. You don't always hear those stories in there. And you have to keep going back over and over again and hope that they'll talk about those things that were asked and they might share something. So anyway, my wife says I talk too much. Okay, I have kind of two parts. One is when you talk about migration, can you see us as FLRs taking part in archaeological assessments within migration territories as opposed to just treaty territories? For us, I don't think capacity. It's hard for them to make those capacity to deal with that, but I don't. It's not in. So what we get with treaty territories or traditional territory overlap is that built into the consultation and accommodation. So there's like a legal backing in that. Outside of that, there is some involvement or invitation outside of that. But that's all good in a good, safe manner. So like if there's something out there that like they knew it was tied to our community, maybe they knew that. I don't that like for us, that's not in the immediate cards. I don't think. I'm not privy to like a lot of higher end
decisions. If that helps, that help?
Little bit. So the second part is the storage. So you're Jordan, you have your license, you have some artifacts. I don't know, maybe some fauna, maybe some human remains and disaster stress. What? How do you? In my mind, I can see a monetary gain from disaster for some holders because the prices are equal prices. And do you see anything coming about that says a little more insurance on those things, fire retardant and something to the effect of preservation as opposed to, you know, we're gonna stick them in an anti-phase basement in their garage.
Yeah.
Yeah, something for their safeguard and preservation until time comes where they maybe.
Biggest barrier for that is probably the monetary funds to do that. There is more state-of-the-art facilities, there's better ways to store it. But no company, and maybe more recently they're doing now, but there's not this like built-in way to charge and keeping the artifacts. So they're entrusted to hold these artifacts in perpetuity forever, but they're not compensated to do that. So a company that digs it up doesn't have like a line up in perpetuity line item to house it. So it's getting better practice now to include that when building components for projects. But something like there's a place like sustainable archaeology that are trying to handle this type of thing, but that also has a cost to it. It's like I can't remember what it is, like $150 a box, or I don't remember it off the top of my head, but X amount of dollars per box to input it in sustainable archaeology. And that's still too pricey for a lot of companies, or they don't want to cover that cost on their behalf. So a lot of the assemblies that do make it there are covered by this deal or this thing. So there's definitely technology out there, like chemicals that act like water but don't wet materials, or fire retardant boxing for disasters. And that's the reality, is that we lose a lot by that. We lose, maybe not a lot, but there is a fraction of loss to movement, to loss, or to the people that come up of old age and die. And their collections just go to their next of kin. And if they don't care about that, then they just get rid of it. Find in yard sales, you can go to a flea market and probably find arrowheads or projectile points, I should say, or pieces of pottery and things like that. Pretty much any flea market, or sometimes yard sales, things like that. There is, the short answer is, but it costs money. There's better ways to do it, but it all costs money.
That's great. So on behalf Station and Special Events and Culture Unit, Caitlin, myself, and I'm sure everybody here would truly appreciate your amazing insight and your dedication to the work that you do, and how you're able to piece and weave all of the pictures of the story together for us. It really is amazing, and I want to commend you and kind of echo exactly what Tyler said, like you're doing an amazing job, and we can't wait to see where you go from here. So thank you much to you, and also, correct me if I'm wrong, you also won an award last year?
Yes.
What was that award?
One was through the Canadian Archaeological Association, James Pendergast and Margaret Award. That was through the CAA, and then I got one from our community, the Eagle Awards for volunteer.
Great. And then I want to say a special thank you as to all of our people who logged into Zoom. I want to thank you. I think I counted 12 people logged into Zoom, which is a lot. So yeah, I want to say a special thank you for, and to all of you. Good night, everybody. Good night. You don't have to know how much your kids speak. Yeah, good. Okay, so if you end it, it will, it'll just stop the recording and then it'll send to my cloud. So what do you want to do with the recording then?
I don't know. What do you normally do with the recording?
I can put it on YouTube. I can just send it right to you.